Good morning, everyone. Everyone said firstly, I'd like to welcome all of our guests to Kübra University, and I will be your chair this morning. And our title for the session is Shakespeare's Frantic characters. Our first speaker will be Irmak Özevin. She was born in September 1989 in Aydın. After she graduated from Aydın High School, she had a chance to complete her education at Ege University. She has been studying English language and literature at this university for 4 years. She's mostly interested in literature, especially Turkish and English literature. Analyzing fantasy stories and mythical legends are her favorite field. She speaks some French, and she's planning to study in her department in the future. Our second speaker, Kübra, Vural, is a fourth-year undergraduate student at Hacettepe University Department of British Language and Literature. She was born on the 25th of November, 1990. She's from Ankara, Turkey. She graduated from Alev High School in Ankara. Her research interests are medieval English literature, Renaissance, literary criticism, and translations. She presented her works in 6 conferences: Undergraduate Conference of Anglo-American Literature, representing the other at University, first ASSE International Conference on British and American Studies Only Connect at University of Vural, Undergraduate Conference on Anglo-American Literature, Gender and Sexuality, Literary Criticism Conference at Lear University, and Florence Multidisciplinary Conference 2012. She plans to be an academic in the field of British language and literature. Our last speaker, Ayşegül Türkeri, was born in Adana in 1989. After graduating from Balıkesir Foreign Language Intensive High School, she started her university education at Pamukkale University in the Department of English Language and Literature in 2007. Having left Pamukkale University due to her unceasing desire to study at the Faculty of Languages, History and Geography, she registered in her new faculty in 2009. Together with the Department of English Language and Literature, she studies in the Department of International Relations at Open Education faculty as well. She is currently a senior student in her department. This is the second time that she has participated in an undergraduate students conference. Last year, she presented the representation of gender roles in Harry Potter in the second undergraduate conference on Anglo-American literature, gender and sexuality. She is interested in fantastic fiction, folk literature, especially fairy tales, and reflection of tales on the cinema as well as industrial novels. Now we can skip to our first speaker, Irmak Özevin.
Today my topic is embracing reality, leaving behind reasoned contractors, Hamlet and King Lear. Madness, mostly called as insanity in psychology, is briefly explained as a chain of abnormal mental behaviors and violations of these patterns by becoming dangerous for oneself and the others without having an awareness of what is right or what is wrong. This mental disorder is seen such an humanistic outburst of the accumulations of unsolved problems located in subconsciousness of an individual, which is in one sense like a defense mechanism. That's usually used in many areas, especially literature, in order to keep the attention of the reader alive. However, in contrast to the clinical definition, which is basically defined as leaving reason behind, this pathetic term is used as a veil that allows for both readers and characters to see the reality after exposing one transformation in fictional world. In fact, there can be found many particular examples for the case in the area. Undoubtedly, great playwright William Shakespeare never leaves his plays with his plays Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, and the tragedy of King Lear when the point comes into this topic. Shakespeare gives an irrefutable identification for madness by noting minutely into the lives of the main characters. Actually, in almost all his plays of Shakespeare, it is common to come across lunatic characters who can see beyond the reality like blind prophets in ancient mythical stories or legends. As in these kinds of story, ironically in Shakespeare's play, it's not important what it seems, it's important what it is. Especially every reversal scene begins with the reversal of the mind of the characters simultaneously. It is practical to think madness as a mirror through which Shakespearean character can see their inner truth, their inside. Irrationality in literal world generally connotes to stand close to nature, the reality. Hamlet, which is one of Shakespeare's well-known plays, is the best one which uses madness as a plot mover. Hamlet, the main character, has such a humanistic depiction that the reader mostly has some trouble to believe his madness among the play. That's why his madness divides the literature world into two different sides. Those who support the unfeigned madness of Hamlet came across not being able to cope with his beloved father's death and the marriage of his mother, while the others support the feigned madness to take revenge of his father's murder and to wipe out his mother's adultery relationship with his uncle just after a nearly death husband. Some readers and critics believe that it is the true madness after hearing his mother's cruel murder through the mouth of the natural being, even though there are found some undeniable evidences which underline the existence of pretended madness to Hamlet himself by following the ghost instructions to take a tasteful revenge of his father. If this is analyzed under the principle of great psychologist Sigmund Freud, this emotion total comes from Oedipus complex, which according to Freud's theory brings about the process of childhood in every individual. This complex can be defined as a sexual tendency of a boy towards his mother and his declinations of sharing her with her other person. Each one of them seemed like a rival for the eyes of a child in the family. In the play Hamlet, in some sense, cannot acknowledge the sudden marriage of his mother with his uncle. He exactly never wants to share his mother with another character, other from his father, because a man has always struggled with the situation connected with the mental progress and psychological file based on the development phases of Sigmund Freud. Namely, in this perspective, it's cruel to say that he is solely man in regard of his hesitation by fulfilling his requirements. As Freud said, the play is built up on Hamlet's hesitations over fulfilling the task of revenge that's assigned to him. Although he has countless opportunities to kill his uncle, he always puts back his actions and finds no power to become active. Obviously, from here, he's not only a madman, but also a man of hesitation. Hamlet represents the type of man whose power of direct action is paralyzed by an excessive development of his intellect. His abnormal actions, the proof for his madness, is nobody with mental disabilities he can care about the consequences of his death and just does it without consciousness. Yet Hamlet thinks carefully before taking steps to reach his ambitions, for instance, even though he knows the bloody deed in detail by hearing from the ghost of his father. He organizes a play which is planned to be shown in front of his uncle father to observe the attitudes, and this absolutely indicates that he still has ground much until seeing the truth in his own eyes. Above all, he is questioning about his situation throughout the play, and is, as if he is embroidering slowly, can manage to obtain his desire despite the process gloomy death at the end. Furthermore, in the course of the play, the characters that think in man are Ophelia, Claudius and Polonius, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in different perspectives. Polonius in this point is a striking character who is also the first person that learns about Hamlet's mental state in many plays. Gertrude and Claudius, by persuading this madness, comes from his unrequited love for his daughter, Ophelia that truly comes from his arrogance and supposes to know everything. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are also convinced his madness after speaking with him for as much as they think his ambition had been hindered. Hamlet, Act 3. Even Queen, as knowing her son well, has always doubts about the case. Despite these three characters, the play has no other action can be attributed to madness to Hamlet's unique established character features. Hamlet is undoubtedly affected by the happenings. This is true and natural for an ordinary man. In some sort, it is true to say that madness is a technique for a way of escaping from pains and unsolved problems. Shakespeare sets madness in such an important place in his play that it is like the skeleton of a human body. At this juncture, it is impossible to emphasize the thoughts of T.S. Eliot, who advocates that Shakespeare unable to provide Hamlet's situation because of lacking objective correlative, which is defined as a set of object, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of a particular emotion. Eliot stressed that the author uses madness due to the fact that he fails to find the dramatic effect to express Hamlet's real emotions while creating a tragic character. Abnormal behaviors are commonly used by Hamlet in his taking revenge theory, and he is such a good player that he sometimes plants the seeds of doubt into the minds of both people of Elsinore and the reader of the play on the way of his revenge. However, in some points, Shakespeare's practical mind comes into mind, and with some references, he lets the receiver know about the real desire of his hero. Hamlet is a madman seeing beyond appearance despite of having exaggerated melancholy. According to Freud, in Matter of Melancholy, there always the loss of beloved objects or persons, and also he suggests that individuals who has pathologic mourning, like Hamlet, cannot go beyond the process of lamentation and find a balance between the time before his father's murderer besides his father's after marriage with his uncle, and after experienced this painful moral disorder. He can solve his problems while changing the state of mind, turning his face towards the mirror of madness in order to comprehend the solution. William Shakespeare's other play, The Tragedy of King Lear, is the other one that uses madness as a big step on the way for reaching the real truth. The play basically tells a story about a father who wants his daughters to show their love to him in order to satisfy his arrogance in front of his people, which results in an ingratitude of his heroes and leaves Lear in a miserable condition at the end. It's not only the tragedy of the specific characters as in Macbeth or Hamlet. It can be accepted as a tragedy of old age, its weakness, smell of our bleeding love, with enemies seeking to supplant or thrust aside hunger generation trading it down in its narrow sense. Madness in the play has a significant role in terms of a critical transformation of King Lear through the end of the text. With the help of being lunatic, he is able to learn wisdom, understanding, and self-knowledge. His suffering changes him as if turning his face toward lightness from darkness. Traditionally, Shakespeare uses madness in connection with the storm as in also King Lear. According to some speculations, being exposed to this storm may have caused physical illness, which results in delirium. Yet it appears that Lear is splitting into insanity after having only been in the storm for a short time. Therefore, it could be argued that it is what he thinks as the justice and ingratitude of his older daughter's behavior which causes him to crack. As the storm rages around him, he would resolve with agony of his silliness for dividing kingdom between his unreliable daughters, except for Delia, his youngest child, loses his rationality. Namely, the madness that indicates in the play is the natural reactions of King Lear's life, which lacks meaning or purpose. The world of him is one of the bleak and empty one, like the world of Gloucester, as flies to phantom boy. They kill us for their sport. It should be said that King Lear's madness totally depends on the exact definitions of madness. The interpretation must be that Lear is splitting into a form of insanity and perhaps dementia. Solely from his implication, it is inevitably true that if Lear only becomes mad because of his circumstances, then it can be argued that his madness is not a neurological condition, but still a manifestation of grief, love, anger, and passionate desire for revenge. For this case, there are some suppositions upon the madness of King Lear among some critics. In his 1983 article, Kale takes an interesting excursion into the history of psychiatry as it relates to Shakespeare and also diagnosis in Lear, a case of progressive senile dementia that is accompanied by an attack of what could be described today as acute mania, as demonstrated by his faulty judgment, disorientation, and irrational behavior. On the other hand, the thinker Coleman established for Lear a diagnosis of brief reactive psychosis with a background of organic mental disorder, perhaps of vascular origin, exemplified by the king's visual hallucination and an imitation of a stroke just before Lear's death. Lear's madness is exactly the turning point for the fate through the play. He becomes of his hubris, because of his hubris, does not accept to see his daughter's aims and hypocrisy. It is something like playing chess in which Lear cannot pursue the coming points of his daughters. He may be due to his habit of ordering as a ruler, his inexperience in the dutiful attitudes of minions, including his own daughters, and that's why he continues making a move on the chessboard against his people incessantly. As it's very well known, there are two different... What makes it interesting is its resemblance to Plato's cave theory in certain sense. As it is very well known, there are two different worlds, the world of idea, the real world, and the sensible world, the world of generation and destruction. The ordinary people belong to a sensible world, have lived and changed to the wall of a cave all of their lives, facing a blank wall, just seeing the reflections of the real things found in the real world of ideas. The one who can break the chains and run out of the darkness of the cave can see the sun and reach the real truth, but from the moment he will be considered as lunatic among the others, who is doomed to see the reflection. If the theory adapted to the play, Lear is the one who is bounded with the chain in the dark side of the cave, and always see the imitations of the real thing in front of him without recognizing the real shape of these imitations, which is found is behind. In this topic, the chain can be accepted to be his kingdom, prevents him to get out of the dark, and the imitation on the wall are his daughter's fake behaviors. By throwing off his bound, with the help of his little daughter Cordelia, he comes out of the cave and begins to see the brightness which makes him man at first sight. In conclusion, lunatic characters of both King Lear and Hamlet in the Shakespearean world are not something surprising in accordance with the time they were written, the features of tragedy that touches upon the downfall of the persona. During Shakespeare's each character shows the result of isolation and disconnection from his family, a microcosm of the Elizabethan world of society, a microcosm of the same world. Abnormal behaviors are chronically used by the playwright as a technique to keep the attention alive and to sustain the idea that in order to see the reality, it is necessary to strip off rationality. Moreover, the irony Shakespeare explores in both Hamlet and Lear is that, while characters dissembling madness features in both, so does the idea that men lack hypocrisy and speak the truth. In 1689, Thomas Tryon wrote that mad people, an innocent child, do speak forth whatever arise in their fantasies, and appear naked, having no covering veil or thick leaves before them to hide themselves in, and therefore they no longer remain under mask or disguise, but appear even as they are. This is the end of my paper, and this is my work, so thank you for listening.
First of all, I would like to thank you for the Kent University for such a good organization, and the title of my paper is The Result of Tragic Burden in Different Dimensions of Madness in Hamlet. The most famous tragedy of the world, Hamlet, is the revenge story of the Prince of Denmark, Hamlet. After learning the reason of his father's death, Hamlet decides to take revenge from his uncle Claudius, and the Renaissance man turns into an avenger. In his plot of revenge, Shakespeare gives the mask of madness to Hamlet. The young Prince of Denmark pretends to be a mad person in order to hide his real intentions from his mother Gertrude and uncle father Claudius. His feigned madness deeply affects his relationship with Ophelia, the lover of Hamlet, at the same time. He is cruel towards her, and she is disappointed by his abnormal behaviors and accusations. Following Hamlet's accidental murder of her father Polonius, Ophelia becomes mad. Her real madness is contrast to the feigned madness of Hamlet in the play by Shakespeare. The immortal writer results the tragic burden of the characters in different types of madness. The major aim of this paper is to analyze different dimensions of madness observed in the characters Hamlet and Ophelia in William Shakespeare's Greek tragedy Hamlet. Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, is a well-educated Renaissance man who suffers from the death of his father and oblivion of his mother, who is married to his uncle Claudius. The first encounter with Hamlet takes place in the court of the new king Claudius, when Hamlet expresses his discontent with the words. He is seen as moody, cold, grieving heavily for his late father's death, and hating his successor, whose great crime is still unknown to him, end quote. Although he restricts his thoughts in front of them, his actual feelings and consciousness are accessible in his soliloquies. In his first soliloquy, Hamlet shows his reaction about the matter in the words that, "Within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married, almost wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets." After his speech, Hamlet is informed about the ghost of his father by Horatio. This connection with the ghost leads the whole action in the play. The ghost leads the truth that King Hamlet is poisoned by Claudius. With the ghost words that, quote, "Revenge is full and most unnatural murder," end quote, Hamlet is ordered to take revenge of his father and dedicates himself to this aim in the rest of the play, so he changes a lot. Obviously, the reality behind the death of his father creates this disorder in his thoughts and torments him. It is a burden on his conscience, and the world's appearance suddenly changed. Major aspects of the accepted society were now destined to be destroyed by him. As a result, the Renaissance prince turns into an avenger and has to hide his real intentions under the mask of madness. First of all, Hamlet tries to find consolation by sending letters to Ophelia. However, Ophelia is already warned by her brother Lear and her father Polonius about Hamlet's love. As he is a prince, he will have to consider the interests of the kingdom in his decision of marriage. So, when commanded to speak no more with Hamlet, Ophelia simply promises obedience. Her rejection of the lover affects the attitudes of Hamlet towards her. Therefore, his weird behaviors are related to Hamlet's for Ophelia. The author of these ideas is Polonius, who claims that Hamlet is mad as Ophelia rejects him. He convinces Claudius and Gertrude about this matter too. Hamlet is considered as mad by everyone. In this way, he is able to hide the actual reason of his change easily. Moreover, it can be claimed that Hamlet's pretended madness and foolery help to disguise his motivations in a chaotic show of misdirection and evasion. The things that he does are mere acting. The world outside and the people around Hamlet become a threat for him. The mask of madness, pretending madness actually, protects him. He is able to show his reaction in this way too. For example, he both teases and plays with Polonius with his witty verse. On the other hand, Gertrude's too much changed son behaves as he used to when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are sent to spend time with him. In addition, Hamlet's interest in the actors and acting reflects the ideals of a Renaissance prince, and the idea of playing murder of Gonzaga to catch the conscience of Claudius proves his genius mind. When it comes to his relationship with Ophelia, Hamlet is aware of the fact that she is obedient to the orders of the others. Polonius' arranged meeting of Ophelia and Hamlet reveals this fact. Ophelia can be described as a girl who is, quote, weak and passive, incapable of self-assertion or the pursuit of her personal goals, submissive, accepting of inferiority, and finding self-fulfillment in obedience, end quote. Her fragile nature and behaviors are sinister aspects of decision that is all around him. Hamlet bursts out his anger by saying that, quote, believe none of us, go thy ways to nunnery, end quote. And he continues that, God hath given you one face and you make yourselves another. You jig, you amble, and you lisp, and nickname God's creatures and make your wantonness your ignorance. Though Hamlet actually loves her and utters it openly in the scene of her burial, he is cruel towards her at that time because of her choice. Shakespeare makes Ophelia experience a woman tragedy because there is a lover on his side determined to spare his beloved the worst, the woman on her side determined to fulfill her duty. As obedience is her ideal womanhood, she is tormented by her lover and convinced that he is mad. Like others, she is also deceived by the feeling madness of Hamlet. Moreover, Ophelia can be said to be the victim of the patriarchal society. The fate of Ophelia is determined by the acts of Hamlet. Meanwhile, Hamlet suffers from his inactiveness as he does not take revenge from Claudius. He accuses himself of being a coward as his words do not suit to his acts. In his third soliloquy, he calls himself, oh, what a rogue and peasant slayer am I. When he is in distress, with the responsibility of his duty to take revenge, he identifies what prevents him from acting in his first soliloquy, saying that, thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickened over with the pale cast of thought, and enterprise of great pitch and moment, with disregard their currents turn away, and lose the name of action. He is in agony, and the play of murder of Gonzaga leads the action to a climax as it lays bare the guilty conscience of Claudius. Later, Hamlet witnesses the confession of Claudius, saying, my fault is past, but oh, what form of prayer can serve my turn? Forgive me my cruel murder, that cannot be, since I am still possessed of these effects for which I did the murder, my crown, my own ambition, and my queen. After this speech, Hamlet stops about the ghost maybe a devil fades away, and when he goes to his mother, his passion of taking revenge is so vivid that he kills Polonius behind the arras, thinking that he is Claudius. He at least takes an action and tries to persuade Gertrude not to be with her new husband. However, Hamlet's action is regarded as the peak of madness, and Claudius sends him to England and plans the murder of Hamlet on the way. But the most important result of this act is the madness of Ophelia, which is contrasted to fiend madness of Hamlet in the play. After the death of her father, she is seen singing and distributing flowers and herbs in the court. In her case, reality becomes unbearable, and her father's murder by her lover has torn a rent in the fabric of her relationship to the world. Hamlet's madness differs from Ophelia as he just plays the madman. Acting like a mad person, he creates a self-ground for him not to cause Claudius suspect him. On the side of Claudius, quote, a madman is not after all to be feared as one fears a cunning enemy, end quote. Accordingly, Hamlet talks and acts in a weird way. Moreover, he never loses his touch with reality. He always recognizes people, though mocking the pretense not to do so. He always knows what he is doing. His speech is not even incoherent. The characters in the play are confused, but not the audience. His sayings in the fourth soliloquy even show that he philosophically questions life and death. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind of sufferer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more. And by sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, this a consummation devotedly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. When he returns from England, Hamlet seems more mature too. On the other hand, Ophelia loses her connection with the world and reality. She cannot tolerate the grief of her father's death and becomes mad. Her condition is described to Gertrude and Horatio by a gentleman in Act 4, Scene 4. She speaks much of her father, says she hears. There is tricks in the world and hams and beats her heart, spurns enviously at strokes, speaking things in doubts that carry but half sense. Her speech is nothing, yet the unshaped use of it doth move the hearer's collection. Her pure madness drives her nothingness in the end. Furthermore, it can be supposed that Ophelia feels herself guilty. She sings boldly songs, and this can be related to Hamlet's previous accusation towards her. It is probable that she regards herself as the reason of Hamlet's madness, and naturally the murder of her father. This burden may also lead to death and madness. In addition, it is an interesting point that both Hamlet and Ophelia are led to the realm of madness in different ways after the murder of their fathers by William Shakespeare. Furthermore, their youths and lives are wasted. Ophelia is found drowned, and Hamlet is killed by the poisonous sword of Laertes in the end. When all things are considered, William Shakespeare's famous play Hamlet is based on young Prince Remain's story. Claudius' treacherous act of murder brings tragic ends to all characters. In order to cover his actual intentions, Hamlet disguises himself under the mask of madness and devotes himself to take revenge. Behaving according to his aim, he suffers from his conscience. The tragic burden destroys his whole life and affects others around him too. His beloved Ophelia becomes the victim of the revenge plot. Her obedience to her family separates her from the lover, and Hamlet's accidental murder of her father, Polonius, causes her to lose her mind. She really becomes mad by losing her connection with the world. Shakespeare juxtaposed the real madness of Ophelia with the feeling madness of Hamlet in the play. The tragic burden of Hamlet and Ophelia results in different types of madness in the play. They are driven to their own tragedies in the realm of madness. Thank you.
Thank you. We can listen to Ayşegül Türkeri.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Greetings from Ankara University, Languages, History and Geography Faculty. The pleasant memories, your hospitality and the academic fruitfulness of the previous year prompt me to attain this conference again. I would like to thank my dear lecturer, Zeynep Atayurt, who is here with us. She never withholds her aid and her advices from her pupils. And let's start. The madness of the literary mind. Many men of literature have often been considered mad, or to put it kindly, extraordinary, since they have had different standpoints than ordinary men, thanks to their artistic temperament. Thus, the way they perceive and conceptualize the world has been shaped by this artistic tendency, and it is with this artistic temperament they have charmed the masses, enabling them to discover different worlds beyond their understanding. So, what nourishes such revolutionary minds to always go further and change people's perception? The answer lies within literature itself. That is to say, a man of literature is free from any kind of restriction. No rational rule or natural law can impose any formulas or offer a proper pattern for him to create his literary piece of work. Hence, the spring that feeds him is his own infinite imagination. Here I would like to refer to Master Shakespeare. Shakespeare comments on being a poet in a Midsummer Night's Dream in a rather humorous way, saying, "The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are all imagination, all compact." The idea that I would like you to consider in this quotation is the way in which Shakespeare situates the lunatic, the lover, and the poet side by side. Perhaps the common trait that brings them under the same umbrella is their imaginative skill. This may lead us to the conclusion that imagination encompasses a dichotomy, as it can be the right one either to become a man of literature or to turn into a lunatic. There is just one difference between them, depending on how it is put into perspective. Shakespeare provides a striking insight into this, saying, "One sees more devils than Vastal can hold, that is the madman. The poet's eye in fine frenzy rolling, though glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet then turns them to shapes and gives to every nothing a local habitation and a name." In this quotation, Shakespeare praises the poet, underlining the poet's capacity for great imagination. In these lines, Shakespeare also refers to the artistic process that enables the poem to create images or things that do not have a shape at all. As Shakespeare states, the poet creates things out of nothing, giving an identity to every nothing with a godlike manner. It is a paradox that while Shakespeare appraises the man of literature in the same manner as the lunatic, he ascribes a higher status to the poet due to the poet's imaginative and creative skill. Now I would like to refer to the interesting, even pleasant biographical accounts of three literary figures that arguably strengthens Shakespeare's view. The first one is William Blake. In a critical work entitled Life and Literature in England, it is stated that a far more original poet, really an eccentric genius, was William Blake. As the boy could not stand the whippings at school, his father kept him at home. There he absorbed few traditional ideas of any sort and developed his own peculiar kind of imagination. At 4, he screamed with fright because he saw God put his head to the window. At 8, his father nearly thrashed him because he came back from a walk declaring that he had seen a tree filled with angels. Not long thereafter, he beheld angels walking among the haymakers in a field. Because he had this imaginative power to come into direct relation with the unseen world, Blake is called a mystic. This attitude is obviously common among little children and is expected to cease as a child grows older. However, the powerful imagination of Blake when he was when he was a child becomes even stronger in his adulthood. In her critical work, History of English Literature, Mina Organ emphasized Blake's imaginative power, saying, since the reality for him is not the visions of the external world, but sprung from his inner world, those who were not in his cycle of acquaintance described him as mad. Organ refers to Blake's memories, stating, one day, Blake conveyed a vision that he had seen so detailed and vivid that the guest, rather frightened, could not help asking where he had seen this vision. To her amazement, he showed his head with his index finger, indicating that these visions do not exist in the outer world, but he sees them in his inner world. Drawing on Blake's account of this experience, it might be argued that Blake gives a local habitation and a name to everything. According to Blake, it is in the very hands of human beings to develop imagination in order to perceive truth. Indeed, he believes this is one of the fundamental aims of an artist. Therefore, it is not surprising for us to come to the conclusion that such a little child can achieve such an unbelievable level of imagination. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. The second figure is Percy Bysshe Shelley. Just like William Blake, he had been considered extraordinary from his childhood to his maturity. He was against traditions and all sorts of accepted views in society. It was traditional at that time to conclude a letter with, "I am, sir, your obedient servant." However, at the age of 11, Shelley concluded his letter to his father with the following words, "I am not your obedient servant." He was always critical of the community pressure, defining it as the mythical monster everybody. His years at Eton and Oxford play a significant role in his being labeled Mad Shelley, the reasons of which might be attributed to his reluctance to adapt himself to Eton and its conventions. The pamphlet on the necessity of atheism published in Oxford when he was 18 reveals his revolutionary mind and his disobedient nature. Thus, we can naturally expect him to write The Mask of Anarchy, in which he offers a wake-up call to people, an attempt to shatter human beings' complacent attitude. Rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. You are many, they are few. The last figure I chose is George Orwell. I guess most of us are familiar with Orwell's account of his childhood. I was the middle child of 3, but there was a gap of 5 years on either side, and I barely saw my father before I was 8. For this and other reasons, I was somewhat lonely, and I soon developed disagreeable mannerisms which made me unpopular throughout my school days. I had the lonely child's habit of making up stories and holding conversations with imaginary persons, and I think from the very start my literary ambitions were mixed up with the feelings of being isolated and undervalued. I knew that I had a facility with words and a power of facing unpleasant facts, and I felt that this created a sort of private world in which I could get my own back for my failure in everyday life. Nevertheless, the volume of serious writing, which I produced all through my childhood and boyhood, would not amount to half a dozen pages. I wrote my first poem at the age of 4 or 5, my mother taking it down to dictation. I cannot remember anything about it except that it was about a tiger and the tiger had chair-like teeth. A good enough phrase, but I fancy the poem was a plagiarism of Blake's Tiger. This sincere expression demonstrates how he was imaginative when he was a little boy and how this imaginative positively affected his future career as a writer, leading him to write the words below which echo in the ears of thousands of people. are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And the creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. These three men of literature are highly influential figures in the English literary canon. Their enthusiasm of understanding and then conveying human nature inevitably puts a distance between them and their society. This distancing process led to the alienation of men of literature and resulted in their being described as the other, the different, the extraordinary, and the mad. All that I have mentioned up to this point is just one side of the coin, and there is of course the other side, which stands for the authority. Imagination is undoubtedly a form of power. We have read about how literary works have tended to change the natural course of the world. It might be argued that almost all revolutionary works either influenced or have been influenced by these events, such as the idea of democracy, the Renaissance, French Revolution, modernism, and most recently the Arab Spring. Literature has always been at the heart of these movements that mark a touchstone for humanity. Then, the power lying under literature is to prompt the masses to greater awareness, sensitivity, and resistance. This power might be attributed to the tendency of literature to directly address our feelings. Art is irrational and emotional, and it does not depend on any rational rule. Therefore, it has no limitation, or sky is the limit. A statement which seems to epitomize some of the aspects of art in relation to the vast creativity that it wields. It goes without saying that art creates images which reflect various sides of life and enunciates the richness of perception, providing awareness. Furthermore, art evaluates incidents from an opposing standpoint, all of which contributes to the formation of a fully developed human being, both mentally and emotionally. Such a fully developed person, of course, cannot be kept under control since no authority is able to dictate a reasoning mind. To make it clearer, I would like to cite Plato's Republic. In the Republic, Plato explains poetry as imitation, namely mimesis, not the reality itself. This idea occupies the core of his disapproval of poetry, namely literature. In Book 10, he takes defense against poetry on philosophical and moral grounds. For the former one, he underlines that poetry does not direct people towards the truth. Instead, it prompts people to deviate from the truth. And for the latter one, the reason why he disallows poetry is the notions of good and evil. According to Plato, man has higher principle of reason together with lower temperament of emotions. In this view, what stimulates rationality is good, whereas what inspires sensations is evil. Plato explains his theory of ideas through the example of a bed. According to the theory, God, the natural author, is the first creator of the idea of a bed. The second one is the craftsman, the carpenter, who turns the idea into a shape for a particular purpose, and eventually the artist, namely painter, portrays the bed, and as Plato states, and the tragic poet is an imitator, and therefore, like all other imitators, he is twice removed from the king and from the truth. Therefore, his creations have an inferior degree of truth. In this, I say he is like him, and he is also like him in being concerned with an inferior part of the soul. And therefore, we shall be right in refusing to admit him into a well-ordered state, because he awakens and nourishes and strengthens the feelings and impairs the reason. As in a city when the evil are permitted to have authority and the good are put out of the way, so in the soul of man, as we maintain, the imitative poet implants an evil constitution. For he indulges the irrational nature, which has no discernment of greater and less, but thinks the same thing at one time great and at another small. He is a manufacturer of images and is very far removed from the truth. In this quotation, Plato swings round into clear disapproval of poetry because it awakens the feelings of people. So, poetry opens untouched fields for people, setting them free from all rational restrictions, a situation which Plato considers the ultimate danger for a perfect and logically governed state. Indeed, Plato continues, and the same may be said of lust and anger and all the other affections, of desire and pain and pleasure, which are held to be inseparable from every action. In all of them, poetry feeds and waters the passions instead of drying them up. She lets them rule, although they ought to be controlled, if mankind are ever to increase in happiness and virtue. Hence, the activity of creativity and consequently arousing feelings should be avoided in Plato's well-ordered state, since this awakening would result in the loss of authority over citizens. Plato also rejects poetry in his Society on educational grounds. In Book 2, he defines poetry as fictitious, namely a lie. According to him, the best way of education could be accomplished through gymnastic, an activity which he sees a way to stimulate both the body and the soul. He attaches great importance to the education of the young, and he finds telling stories, especially during their upbringing, dangerous. He says, then the first thing will be to establish a censorship of the writers of fiction and let the censors receive any tale of fiction which is good and reject the bad. And we will desire mothers and nurses to tell their children the authorized ones only. Let them fashion the mind with such tales even more fondly than they mold the body with their hands, but most of those which are now in use must be discarded. In conclusion, I would like to refer to Plato's cave. The analogy is formed through the dialogue between Socrates and Glaucon at the beginning of Book 7. Those who are kept chained inside the cave think that the shadows they see on the wall are the truth. Their understanding is constructed by and limited to those illusions. However, when one of them is released from the chain, he comprehends that the reality is outside of that cave. He grasps the difference between the truth and the illusions. He can see well than the rest of all, and he is able to pass judgment on the nature of reality. Inevitably, he is distinguished from the others in the cave as a different one, which is the first step of elimination. Indeed, how does a wise man keep silent against misconception? In this case, the one who gains that wisdom is the philosopher. Nonetheless, we can adopt this analogy to a man of literature. The cave representing society draws a limitation. The man of literature cannot be bound by the norms of that society. He goes out of the cave and experiences novelty. Therefore, upon returning to the cave, we cannot expect him to keep on believing the shadows as reality. He would not be content with the stable, opinionated, standstill and static society, because from that point onwards, there will always be more to see and more to do for him. He is no more a man on all fours. Whenever he attempts to exhibit the truth through his writings, the gap between him and his society would get wider and wider. Eventually, since the caveman held the majority of his society, his voice would turn into a faint echo, yet such an echo that would never die out. He would always occupy a part in society whilst being called that madman. He would not be understood and consequently put outside of the social circle that is enclosed with invisible walls. As he is regarded as mad, he would be the undesirable member of his society. However, as in human we trust, the number of people who are released from these chains thanks to the writings of men of literature would increase. And then the faint echo would turn into a strong voice crying, "What is life of a man but art and science?"
I believe our speakers can receive questions and comments now. Yes, please.
I want to ask a question of all three speakers. It's a basic question. Shakespeare writes plays in the early 17th century about madness. What importance does his views of madness have for people living in the 2010s? What importance does Shakespeare's views on madness have for people today?
I'd like to answer first of all. I think Shakespeare knows the essence of man really. So he gives a universal voice to all his ideas. So it is his values and ideas are still valid today. Because he knows the essence, the truth of mankind and the universe, I think, he gives such a voice that we still discuss about the same matters again and again.
Other two?
I think I agree with her. He knows the core of madness, and it is a concept that don't change. I think madness, in essence, is madness. We can adapt it to our century, to other eras, but the core still preserves its qualities.
I want to say that I never know what Shakespeare's mind, but I think he tries to show the real truth by creating chaotic plays because the people's feelings have never changed since his time and in our time. So, as my friend said, he gives a universal voice for his character.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
I have a question for Mr. Özevin. And I have a doubt about Oedipus complex and Hamlet, actually, because you say that Hamlet don't want his mother to marry with uncle, but on the other hand, you said it's not the same for his father, and in Oedipus complex is the thing that is the boy wants to kill his father and marry, or yes, the mother, but isn't it paradoxical in this situation? Because I think the Hamlet has no problem between the sexuality between her father and mother, but her mother and uncle. It's paradoxical.
I think Hamlet, in his inner mind, wants to marry his mother, and he replaces himself into his uncle's situation. That's why his hesitations to kill his uncle, maybe, because he sees himself in the place of his uncle, the place in which he wants to be in his uncle's situation.
Well, I always get tense when I'm either asking or answering questions regarding Shakespeare, but my question is for the first two presenters. First of all, great presentations, thank you for that. Shakespeare is known to use madness as a theme on various occasions. And in Hamlet we have a duality of madness in Hamlet, the character. The perceived pretend madness that Hamlet plans on doing, and the established inherent madness that arises in the progressed parts of the play, throughout the mid to the end of the play. What do you think about that? How do you think this affects the plot of the play, and why doesn't Shakespeare use madness, the real inherent madness from the get-go, but decides to use it as an established real madness that appears later on in the play?
Shakespeare uses the duality in his all works. He puts two sides of an idea or a thing, and he compares them in itself. And it is also related to his education at his school years. He receives such a kind of education in which he learns how to compare things and how to create a balance or how to unite these ideas together. And in relation to this idea, he always creates minor oppositions in his plays or other in relation to Hamlet. He creates this thing to see what appears on the surface and what is a real thing. We cannot be sure that Hamlet playing a madman if we cannot see Ophelia in her real madness, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask the previous question then? Why do you feel a strain asking questions about Shakespeare? I'm intrigued about that.
He's so difficult to comment on, isn't he? You can never be too sure whether you're commenting on Shakespeare if you're an undergraduate student.
You can't be sure whether you're commenting on Shakespeare, is that
No, you can't be sure regarding your comment when you're commenting on Shakespeare, because it's difficult to present a distinctive and valid opinion about Shakespeare during your undergraduate years, because
pardon me, you said it is difficult to make a comment. What did you say? Please repeat.
On Shakespeare, because he has so many layers.
It is difficult because Shakespeare is a multifaceted and prolific writer. He is a playwright, he is the sonnet, he is the poet of the sonnets, and the reason why we still discuss Shakespeare is that he is a humanist writer and he is a universal writer. In what sense universal? We have to answer for this question. He is universal because he observes the human nature with all its aspects. Especially in Hamlet, he says, "Man, how noble a creature, how artistic man, how body but also how base an animal," he says. So in Hamlet, by means of Hamlet, Shakespeare elaborates on, or rather mirrors, the human nature with all its weak and strong aspects, and therefore his subject matter still sheds light on the today's conditions. Therefore, it may be difficult, rather than difficult, we have to say this shows his harmlessness.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, having fought with Shakespeare now for the best part of 2 decades in classes all over the world, I mean, I think the one thing I think about Shakespeare is that Shakespeare can mean anything to anybody, and it doesn't really matter what people say. So, I mean, okay, you might feel difficult or inhibited making a comment, but I think one of the reasons why I personally like studying Shakespeare is because he means different things to different people on different kinds of situation. So, you know, when I looked at King Lear when I was 18, it meant something very different to when I look at King Lear now. And I think that this is one of the reasons why he's such fun to study, is because the meanings of his particular plays shift over time, both societally and as far as individuals are concerned.
Of course, it changes. It depends on the cultures, for the different cultures. For instance, we evaluate Shakespeare from different perspectives, and for instance, a French or a German evaluates it from different perspectives. However, despite the differences in the perspectives, the common aspect which the people share is Shakespeare is a humanitarian writer, and
a humanitarian writer.
Shakespeare is a humanist writer, and and he portrays man from with all his aspects.
Well, what I understand from what you're saying is that you can do no wrong on commenting Shakespeare. Is that correct?
There's no such thing as a right or a wrong, it just is. I mean, I think the thing is that if anybody says anything about Shakespeare, hey, what the heck, you know, that's actually an interest, it is of interest in any way, you know. That's one of the most fascinating comments I've heard. I'm not taking that as an insult, I'm really interested in the fact that you're admitting some kind of difficulty in actually talking about Shakespeare, because I've never actually heard that, you know. That's all.
I'm not criticizing anyone, but majority of professors in my department certainly think there are wrong answers. So
really,
don't they?
I wouldn't know.
Shouldn't
about
they?
That. I wouldn't know about that.
As a professor in your department,
I'm being diplomatic.
I'm caught between the two of you. I think there are more and less interesting answers, perhaps. I agree that I think, I mean, again, something I'm often saying is I think often the wrongest answers, if there are such things, are also the most interesting. It's the misreading where in some sense you have misunderstood something, but that often gives you the key to open something, to get into something that's really fascinating about the text, because we make mistakes for a reason, and often the text is provoking us into those kind of mistakes. But I think that kind of doubling that you were talking about is again behind the difficulty you're having. That, I mean, I find as I'm teaching, and I have been teaching Shakespeare to some of the poor students here today this semester, that even as I'm teaching it, I'm very aware that almost every statement I make could equally be inverted, turned upside down, and be presented as equally true, equally valid. So from a lecturer's point of view, as opposed to a student's point of view, I have the same problem, or at least a parallel one.
The only difference is I've been in academia for far less a time than you have, so I'm tense when I'm commenting. That's
Can I
all.
just pick up on what you were saying, Patrick? I mean, I have to remember one memorable occasion. When I first encountered Hamlet when I was 18, I was convinced that Hamlet was not the hero of Hamlet. The reason being that I always thought that he was the bad person and Claudius was someone who was more sinned against than sinning. And I remember that my teacher said, "You are completely wrong," but it was actually a good way of discovering something about my own response to the play. Through that answer, which according to my professor was wrong, as you've rightly said, it was a very good way of discovering my own attachments and my own ways in which I could approach, consume, or interpret the play. So I entirely agree with you. Sometimes the wrongest answer, at least as far as a professor is concerned, can actually be one of the most enlightening answers as far as discovering literature and the value of literary texts are concerned. So I just back up what you're saying. So.
And I think, sorry to go on with this, but again, I think that sort of bringing it back to madness in the most kind of colloquial sense, I think, you know, I always like having mad students in my class, the student who will throw out an answer. I'm not looking at you, Ercan, necessarily.
I wouldn't be offended if you were.
But yeah, I think we have to feel free to come up with mad readings and push them to their sort of indeed.
I think it should be limited to Shakespearean works only, that each time you read the text you have some different idea. Yes. I suppose this is...
That's exactly what I meant in my initial comment, because, you know, the possibility of doing no wrong when commenting isn't as beautiful a thing as it might seem to you when you're a student, because then you're expected to not have any fear regarding making mistakes, and making mistakes is perhaps the only fear that a student has got.
Hearing that at weekend, I suppose it's not very convincing at all. I mean, we always encourage you to say something and support your idea, as long as you give examples and explanations. I suppose you shouldn't be.
I'm not saying it's reasonable.
tense.
I'm saying it's factual.
I guess the flip side, if there's no wrong answer, the terrifying prospect is
There
there's
are
no right answer. And as students, I know you're
This is exactly
thrilled
what
to
I've
give
been meaning.
the right answer. And I think
That's why we're studying literature.
Yeah,
That's why
but-
we're lucky, I suppose.
pushing you an interesting answer is what we're after.
Thank you for interpreting.
Sorry.
I guess we're way past time.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
I would again like to thank our speakers and everyone that came. We'll meet this afternoon at 1:30.
2:15.
Are we giving a lunch break?